You, Shannon. Just a reminder that the annual meeting will be the second Sunday in January following church. Are we going to eat, or are we not going to do that again this year because of COVID?
Everybody can bring their own bag lunch. That's a good idea.
Okay,
Just, something for the kids.
Sean has decreed it.
Sorry. That's a good idea.
Priscilla seconds. So if you want to eat that day, bring some food. Are we ready to go in the back there, Tally? Okay.
Hot dog vendor.
Then you don't know what you're going to be eating. Have any of you ever been betrayed? Just think about King David. He's killed the giant. He's been a military leader for a number of years, and he comes to the place where he's on the run from his father-in-law. He's got family problem. He's on the run from his father-in-law's army. He's living in a cave. He's gone from, upper echelon leader in the military to a fugitive. I hear a sound in the sound system that I should not hear. If I stay back here, is it better? There's a humming sound. I can hear low, but I can't hear high. I'm going to have to go get some hearing aids, I think. This year, forget it. If I'm talking to you, I'm going to be looking at you on this side because this one's a little better. This one was closer to the rock concert than this one was, apparently. So, boy, that does say 5 minutes to 11, right? Or 11 o'clock or something. That's good. I looked at it, it looked like it was 5 to 12, and I didn't remember saying a thing. If you're watching online, please comment on the video, click to subscribe, and if you're watching online, please consider making a donation online at cheshire-church.com. Today's sermon is saving Keila. I Googled Keila and I found that Keila is a model, and she's a swimsuit model, and so I saw a whole picture of Keila. But in the Bible, it's a place, it's a city, and it needed to be saved. One of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. So initially, when David is hiding out in Adullam, he does not know that Saul has killed all the priests. Now, when Saul killed all the priests, including the high priest, the one who was praying for him and the one who was offering sacrifices for him, he's now found himself without any intermediary. There's nobody that can, pronounce forgiveness on Saul's head because he's killed them all except Abiathar, and Abiathar is not probably going to be making any offerings for Saul because he's also on the run now. He is also a fugitive, and he is the only person from a very, very large family who has survived. Now, our family got together for Christmas yesterday, and how many were there, Sean? 22. How many of the family of Ahimelech were killed? Something like that, something like 80. Just randomly slaughtered for no reason at all, except for the fact that Ahimelech had given 5 loaves of bread and Goliath's sword, which belonged to David anyway. And Saul is so furious and he's gone so far away from God that he has no conscience left whatsoever. He just kills these people for no reason because they gave David a little bit of bread and sent him on his way. And so Saul comes and, Ahimelech comes and he tells David about the slaughter. Lord Jesus, give me the right words here. I've made 2 mistakes already. So here we have the family again. We see Ahijah. He was Saul's chaplain, and he's descended from Eli and Phinehas and Hophni, and Ahitub was the grandfather. Ahimelech is the one that gave David the bread, and Ahijah is the high priest. He's the one who's praying for Saul, and so Saul kills the whole family except Abiathar. So he becomes David's chaplain. David is now the only one that has the ability to come to a priest and to make an offering and to be forgiven, because Saul has come to the place where he is totally anti-Christ. He's totally anti-God. He's killed all the priests. And it's all because he thinks that David is going to take his job. Is there ever any corporate problem where somebody thinks somebody else is going to take their job? Does that ever cause any kind of betrayal in the real world, in business? How about in school? Does it happen in school, Priscilla, where people, there's a job opening and somebody tries to make it so the other person looks bad so they can get the job? And so this is really a very bad situation. And I want to show you the character of David in the midst of this. He must have felt like he had very few friends, although he did have a whole bunch of people that were following him as a military leader, but he was on the outs with everybody. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I'm responsible for all the lives of your father's house. It's interesting, he doesn't say, I'm responsible for the death of all your father's house, which was, I guess it's like a half full, half empty type of thing. David takes it upon himself. Now, is it really David's fault that this happened? How many times somebody has, if I only hadn't driven over there, this wouldn't have happened. It's my fault. I hear people say that kind of stuff all the time. They take a responsibility upon themselves when it isn't really their fault. David was just doing what he needed to do. He just needed to escape from Saul, and he was basically very hungry. And he stops for a meal. He has no idea that his lies that he told to which one was it? Ahithophel. He had no idea that his lies would cause this thing to happen. But Ahithophel did not know that David was actually escaping. He suspected something was up because he was fearful when David did show up. But it really wasn't David's fault. You can't take responsibility for somebody else's evil. We're responsible for our own evil. But he says to Abiathar, I'm responsible. Now, how do you think Abiathar felt right now? Running for his life, and everybody in his whole household is dead. Not a good situation, was it? Now, if you were David or if you were Abiathar, what would your reaction be? Grief? How about anger? Would we be angry at a situation like this? Certainly grief, and a lot of times grief and anger come together. People get, when something doesn't go right, they lose somebody, they get angry at God. I knew a case one time where a young man decided to kill himself, and he drove into a bridge on purpose, and his grandmother said, why did God do that to him? God didn't do it to him, but the anger at his death made her, put it on. She couldn't put it on her grandson. She had to blame God for it. So he says, hang out with me. The one who seeks your life is seeking my life as well. And so you'll be safe with me. Now, here is a most interesting event that happens at this stage in the game in David's life. They told David, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. David's got problems like right up to here. He's got a fearful group of people with him. And yet he hears that there's a town fairly nearby. We see right here that this is where he is in Adullam, and Keilah is just a little bit to the south of there. And Saul's army is up here. It's not on the map. And so he hears that the Philistines have come against this city. And so what does he do? What would we do? Tough luck. I got enough problems of my own. Am I right? I can remember in my own life, my mother died and Jim Luffman died and a bunch of people left the church. And I was like in the lowest point in my life. This was 21 years ago. We had 13 deaths in the church that year. It was, really, really hard on me. And then there were a lot of people that needed help. It's like, I don't know if I have any energy to help these people because I had so much going on in my own life. My mother had just died of a long, cancer death and so forth. And financially, the church was not in great shape in those days. And so it was hard for me to even relate to other people's problems at that time. And I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying that's just the way that I felt at that time. And so David is in this situation where these people need help. And he is so weighed down with all the things that are going on in his own life. The temptation would be to just ignore it, wouldn't it? And so what does he do? He does just the opposite. Now, I want to talk about the threshing floor because this is a concept in Christianity. Now today, if there's a field of wheat, they got the big harvester. The combine goes through and it cuts the wheat off, and it brings all the parts of the wheat up into like a blower, and it cuts the stalks off, and it cuts the chaff, the thing that's around the wheat, and then there's a big fan on the side, and it blows all the chaff out, and then it just drops all the wheat into the wagon. That's not the way it worked in ancient times. It was before John Deere was a corporation, and so they would have to go out and they would have to plant the wheat by hand. Yeah, they would sow it, they would throw it, and they had to get an even amount, and then they would have to wait for it to grow, and then they would bind it into sheaves, like in the back window up there is an example of the wheat dragged together, and then they would bring it all into the threshing floor, and then they would stomp it. They would stomp it and stomp it, and they would have buildings to do this. And they would set up the buildings in such a way that they would catch the prevailing wind. And so after they stomped it and removed the wheat from the chaff on the threshing floor, they would open up, they'd let the wind come through, and then they would take a winnowing fork and they would throw everything up in the air, and the chaff would blow out the end of the building and the wheat would fall to the floor. So this is the point in the story where they've done all the work. The people of this city have done all the work to get this food to make bread for their whole year, and the Philistines are coming in and they're robbing it. They're basically trying to starve the people of that city, and they're basically, in their greed, trying to take their food away from them. And so when David hears that they're doing this, he goes down, well, let's say he doesn't go immediately, but this is a passage in Matthew, and here's an example of somebody with a winnowing fork throwing wheat in the air. He doesn't have a building, but he's in some place where there's a prevailing wind. And John the Baptist came and said this: I baptize you with water for repentance. One who is more powerful is coming after me. I'm not worthy to carry his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand. He will clear his threshing floor and will gather his wheat into the granary, but the chaff will be burned with unquenchable fire. John's message was a heaven or hell message. There's certain part of that wheat plant that you can eat, and there's a certain part of that wheat plant it's only there to protect the wheat until you separate it and you use it and you eat it. And it wasn't gluten free. It was fully glutened. And so David hears that they're attacking the place where the wheat is separated. So David says, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" He's got a couple hundred people with him. He's on the run. He's been across the Jordan River to take his parents over there to the king. The prophet Gad tells him he has to come back into Judah, so they're in a precarious position anyway. And Saul's army is searching for him, and so he gets to think, should I go? Should I divide myself? Should I go fight in this one place against the Philistines? It's almost stupidity to even think like that. But David was such the kind of guy that really was interested in the welfare of the people who were around him. Notice what it says here. Shall I go? He asks. And God says, save Keilah. Yeah, you got a lot of trouble. And you're probably not thinking that I'm with you, but I am with you. And your responsibility is to help the people that need help. Now he has a problem because his followers are not going to be too keen on this, because it doesn't sound like a logical thing to do given the circumstances that they find themselves in. So they said, let's be practical. His men said, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the enemies of the Philistines? We're in bad shape. We can't mount a battle. We can't save these people. But David didn't. Maybe he thought it, but he certainly didn't say it. He went and he inquired of God what he should do, and God said to him, "Go help these people." And David inquired of the Lord again. The Lord answered him, "Yes, go down to Keilah, and I will give the Philistines into your hand." Now, how did he inquire of the Lord? You know, the thing about prayer, it shows the hands praying, but probably a better example of prayer might be this. Because what we say is not nearly as important as what God is saying. Prayer should be at least 50% listening. David isn't saying, I need a Cadillac and I need a new motorcycle. His prayer was, shall I go save those people or not? Which is the Christian message. Should we be telling people about Jesus? Yes. And Keilah, it means stronghold, and we'll see that it's like a prison. So David and his men, good for them, they followed him. They fought the Philistines. They took their livestock and dealt them a heavy defeat. Thus, David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. Not only did he stop them from taking the grain, but he captured their animals so that, maybe they would have just had bread if this didn't happen. But now they've got meat. Now they've got sheep and goats and buffaloes, not bisons, buffaloes, water buffaloes. So his heart is like completely different from Saul. He does what he does because he wants to save the people. They would have starved otherwise. Now here we see how David inquired, because it said here we're just told in the narrative now, even though there was a general overview of Abiathar coming in the previous verses, it didn't tell us that he had brought that ephod that had the Urim and the Thummim. Because now the priest is with David, and so David has the ability to not just listen to the prophet Gad, who's told him to come into Judah, but now he's able to listen to the priest who has the sacred dice. And so that's, they rolled the dice, and both times it said, go and save these people, which they did, and they were successful. Even though our brain would tell us that would be a foolhardy thing to do. Remember we're talking about the Urim and Thummim? You would throw them out, and they would either be both yes or both no, or if they fell one of each, it was indecisive. Shall I go? Yes. Shall I go? And the people apparently were able to garner a little bit of faith when they saw that the priest was behind the event. Meanwhile, you notice how the whole thing is like this. There's something going on here. There's something, verse after verse, chapter after chapter, it gives different things that are going on concurrently. So meanwhile, back in Camp Delusion, which is Saul's camp, it was told to Saul that David had come to Keilah. And Saul said, God has given him into my hand. How could he be that deluded? He's just killed a whole family of priests. But he still thinks God is on his side. Did the Germans think that God was on their side? Yes, they did. Did the Americans think that God was on their side? Yes, they did. Did the Japanese think that they're Buddhists. They don't believe in God. Their emperor was their God. Did they believe Hirohito? I think so. God has given him into my hand. He shut himself by entering a town that has gates and bars. So as I said a little bit earlier, this city was like a prison. If an army would come against it, they would close all the doors, and then they're locked inside, and all an army has to do is circle the city and starve them out. And so, it's good for a short term to protect yourself, but it's not good for long term. And Jerusalem had been conquered a couple different times, even though it is a city that it has walls and bars as well. Or, it's not so much anymore. You fly over it with a helicopter now. But in those days, you couldn't get in. And so Saul thinks, okay, he is in this place. And when they shut the doors, I've got him. God has given him into my hand. Deluded, evil, wicked, rotten human being. David, as we have talked in the weeks past, he's done nothing at all evil against his father-in-law. So Saul summoned the people. They would summon them with a trumpet, a shofar, a ram's horn, And he said, let's go down. We're going to besiege them. We're going to set up siege works and we're going to starve that guy out of there and we're going to kill him. And all of these people that are following him are absolutely, totally in fear of him because they see what he does to those who are against him. They see what he did to the priest. They see what he's doing to his own son-in-law. And they're afraid to come against him in any way. So out of fear for their own lives, they come and they follow and they do what he says, which has been the case of every atrocity and mass murder in the history of the world. They're afraid of the guy that's going to do it, that he'll do it to them. And so they come around and they're getting ready to go and besiege the city. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against them, he said to the priest, bring the ephod here. It doesn't tell us how he learned. Now, it could be Jonathan was sending messages. But obviously, there was some sort of spy that was letting David know what Saul was doing. And we do know in some cases it was Jonathan, but we don't know that it was in this case. And so he's inside that city. Everybody's happy. He's the greatest guy. He's delivered them. And they probably had a ticker tape parade or something like that. And Saul hears he's there. And so now he's going to go down and get him. David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. And now, will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, I beseech you, tell your servant. So the priest has got the sacred dice, and he throws the dice, and it says, he will. Now, you have to remember that just a few days earlier, his uncle had this. He had the ephod. He had the ability to see what God was doing. Because of his wicked action in killing all these people, this guy's escaped. Now David has it. Will he come down? Yes, he will. Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men to the hand of Saul? They will. In talking to other pastors, sometimes I get together and we have dinner and stuff, and a lot of times they'll say, I feel so bad. I worked with these people for years and years. I was with them through their divorce, and now stab me in the back. And sometimes on Facebook, the other pastors that I know, I can tell when somebody stabbed them in the back because they don't say anything really, but it's like, well, I got to carry on, even though a bad thing has happened in the church. And, it's kind of like, not what have you done for me? It's what have you done for me lately? And so David knows that all the good things he did for these people, probably 7 days earlier or 2 weeks earlier or whatever, he's risked his life for these people. Now he knows that if he stays there, they're going to turn him over. Now, the interesting thing about this particular story is that it tells what will happen. If this happens, this will happen. But if this happens, this will happen. And so he decides to get out of Dodge. They set out and left Keilah, and they wandered wherever they could go. And when Saul was told that David had escaped Keilah, he gave up the expedition. If David had stayed, he would have come and destroyed the city, and they would have been destroyed by their own people, as opposed to the Philistines. But because David selflessly went to help, even though it was a danger to him, the city was saved. Interesting story, don't you think? And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, probably maybe he went back to the cave of Adullam or in that area in the wilderness of Ziph, and sought him. Saul sought him every day, but the Lord did not give him into his hand. What strikes you about this one?
Is it just weird that Saul
Wait for the microphone, please.
As far as I can tell, it looks like David recruited some people in the city, because last week didn't you say he had 300 to 400?
Yeah,
Now he has 600.
his followers are increasing.
So you look at that, and it's not the whole city turned on him, but you can tell there's some people saying, "Well, I'm not giving up my family for this random guy." It's like, so, you think about it logically. Oh, he saved us, so I owe him my family. It's like, personally, I wouldn't like that. But you see, hundreds of people are following him that weren't there before. So David went there. God told him to. He got bigger numbers, saved the city, and left.
Yes.
So only the bad guys got punished.
Well, the real bad guy didn't get punished because he called
The
off the
Philistines.
expedition. Yeah, he
They
called
got
off the
punished.
expedition. Well, I considered Saul to be a worse bad guy than the Philistines personally.
He's not the bad guy this week, though.
He's not the what?
He's not the bad guy this week. Not in
Yeah.
this episode.
Just a few verses before.
Yeah.
He was
In an earlier episode and in future episodes.
Yeah, good point. Anyone else?
Are we willing to go and help people even though they won't be grateful a few weeks after we help them?
That's the question. And that's what makes David different from anybody else probably in the whole group of stories. Caleb. Okay.
Sit on.
Yeah.
We talked about when Saul became king. What's his main job? As
To be a
king?
military leader.
To be a military leader. So while he is out chasing David, we literally have the Philistines invading his kingdom, attacking the thrashing floor, stealing the wheat of the people. Saul's one job is he's supposed to be the one going there and protecting these people, but he's so caught up chasing David that David steps in to do his job. And realistically, if they had held David and had protected him, Saul would have killed all the people that his one job. He's been taken up from a humble-ish family and made king, and all of his responsibilities, he's taking all the benefits, but he's not doing anything that he's actually supposed to be doing.
And his military position was delegated to him against the will of the priests. Samuel said, no, you don't get a king. Yeah, we want a king like the other nations. No, it's not going to be good. He's going to tax you, and he's going to take your kids into the military, and he's going to take your daughters, and he's going to do this. And they said, oh, no, we need a king like the other people. And so you're right, absolutely right. His job is to protect from the Philistines, but he is protecting his job at the cost of the lives of the priests who actually ordained him.
And I had one question. It said that he had the ephod, which was the breastplate. Was the Urim and Thummim, however that's pronounced, were those always included? Were those carried with the ephod of the high priest?
Yes, they were. Got one.
So when David was going through this, he knew he was going to be king. So he
Yes.
felt that responsibility to take care of the people in his kingdom, even though he wasn't the king. But he was smart enough to know that everybody was going to be afraid of Saul, and went to God to first confirm, should I save him? And then, okay, he probably figured they were going to turn him in, but he went to God again to confirm it after the battle. So even though he knew probably when he was marching in there that this was going to possibly cost him, he still did it because he put God's will first.
And he put God's will first, but he also could see what the results of his actions could be in this case. In later cases, not so much, but in this case, he knows that this can happen. It's like one day, just give you an example of this from my father. One day he took me into the back room of Cheap Charlie's restaurant, and he had been to the Christie Specialty Company, and he had new pots and pans and everything, knives, everything you need brand new for the kitchen. The kitchen had all that stuff. But the cook was a hothead, and Dad said, well, one of these days he's going to walk out of here. He's going to take all the pots and pans out of the restaurant on a Saturday night. Sure enough, he did. But Dad could look forward and see the possibility of what could happen. And that's exactly the way it was with David in this case.
But he always seeks, as he's doing things, you see, he knows, he's aware of the situation in the world he is in. So he has that knowledge of the world, but he's putting his trust in God. He's seeking God first.
Mm-hmm.
And doing God's will. And that's really where we're at. We're in the same spot. We need to be aware of what's going on in the world. We have to be doing what's right. And even if the consequences aren't what we're hoping for, if we're seeking God and doing God's will, we can rest in that.
Yes. Anyone else? Did we have more music today or no? Indigata Davida.